All right, 7.5, graphing square root and cube root functions. So let's first start with f of x equals root x. Now, I'm going to do this a little differently than the book does it. The book likes to just base all of ours after this, and they do the shifts and slides and all that stuff, and I don't like that. I want to show you this way. And I want to show you the way that we're going to plot points, because I think it helps with your number sense. Okay, I do. So let's think about our domain here. Let's think about our domain. So domain are numbers that I can plug in for x. What kind of numbers can I plug in for x here? Can I plug in 0? Can I plug in 1? Can I plug in fractions? Can I plug in negatives? Well, yes, I can plug in 0. Yes, I can plug in fractions. No, I can't plug in negatives. If I plug in negatives, I'm going to get a negative number underneath my square root sign, and I'm not going to be able to graph that. So when I look at this one, I'm going to graph so x is greater than or equal to 0. Okay? Now, I do want to use 0, but I want to use numbers that are compatible with the square root function. I don't want to plug in 2 and have to graph the square root of 2, which is 1.41 and all that kind of stuff. Now you can, there's nothing wrong with it, but with an easy one like this, I'm just going to pick numbers that are perfect squares. So I'm going to pick 0, 1, 4, and 9. When I plug in a 0, I get a 0. When I plug in a 1, I get a 1. When I plug in a 4, I get a 2. And when I plug in a 9, I get a 3. So I go to my XY chart. Okay, 0, 0 is here. 1, 1 is here. 2, 3, 4, 2 is here. And it looks like this. So I do want to talk about my range. Okay, and my range are my y values. I can't get any smaller than that. So my range is going to be y is greater than or equal to 0. Now, there's a more sophisticated way to write that. You'll learn this in pre-calculus, but I'll show it to you now. When you want greater than or less than, or you're talking about infinity or negative infinity, we use parentheses. Okay? When you want greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, you want to use brackets. So for this, for my domain, I want x to be greater than or equal to 0. So the way I write that is I write a bracket, 0, comma, then I can go on forever. Okay? I can go to infinity. So I'm going to make it infinity, and like up here I told you, when you deal with infinity or negative infinity, you need a parenthesis. So that's how you write that. Okay? Now for my range, well, in this case it's the same, right? I'm going to have a bracket, 0 to infinity. All right, so that's how you graph the square root function. Let's try the cube root function. So f of x equals the cube root of x. So I'm going to make my xy chart, and let's think about our domain. What kind of numbers can I plug in here if it's an odd root? Well, my domain is going to be all real numbers. Okay, and the way that we write that sophisticatedly is we say negative infinity to infinity. And again, when you're using infinity and negative infinity, you got to use parentheses. You can't put a bracket around infinity. That would be incorrect. So because I can plug anything in, positives and negatives, I need to pick some negatives here and I need to pick some positives. So I'm going to pick negative 8, negative 1, 0, 1, and 8. Because those are all cubes. Okay? So the cube root of a negative 8 is a negative 2. The cube root of a negative 1 is a negative 1. The cube root of 0 is 0. The cube root of 1 is 1, and the cube root of 8 is 2. So I go to my graph. Negative 8, negative 2. Negative 1, negative 1, 0, 0. 1, 1, 8, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 2. So it looks like this. Okay, and there's your graph. We got the domain. What's our range? Well, our range is also going to be all real numbers. So I can get positives, I can get negatives, I can get zero. Okay? So that's how you graph these square root and cube root functions. Let's look at another one. Alexa, skip. I don't know what song this is. All right. So let's say we have this, guys. Let's think about our domain. What is the smallest number that I can plug in here? What are my restrictions when I have a square root sign? My restrictions are I can't have a negative under here. So the smallest number I can plug in is a -1, because this can be 0, but it can't be anything lower than that. So I'm going to say x is greater than or equal to a -1, and then I want to be able to do it. I want you to go into Mr. Fazio's class and make it look like you learned something in Algebra 2. So we're going to make this a bracket -1 to infinity, and that's my domain. So if -1 is the first one I pick, I'm going to pick -1, okay? And that makes what's underneath here a nice perfect square. It makes it 0. What would make this 1? What value do I plug in for x to make what's under there a perfect square of 1? Well, -1, -1 plus 1 is 0, right? So if I want to make this 1, I think I'm going to plug a 0 in, because 0 plus 1 is 1. Now the next number I want this to be is I want this to be a 4. So that means that x has got to be 3, right? And I want this to be a perfect square, 9, so I make this 8. Now you can pick anything you want here. If you want to pick other numbers and have decimals and break out your old calculator, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, so let's plug a -1 in. -1 plus 1 is 0. The square root of 0 is 0, and 0 minus 3 is -3. Let's plug a 0 in. 0 plus 1 is 1. The square root of 1 is 1, and 1 minus 3 is a -2. Plug a 3 in. 3 plus 1 is 4. The square root of 4 is 2. 2 minus 3 is a -1. 8. Okay, 8. 8 plus 1 is 9. Looks like that's going to be 0. So when I graph this, -1, -3 is down here. 0, -2 is over here. 3, -1, 1, 2, 3, -1 is over here. The graph looks like this. So if they ask you to compare this graph to this graph, what do we do? Well, we shifted to the left 1, and that's what that tells me. Left 1, and then this shifted all the points down 3. But I'm not going to worry too much about that. But I want you to see it. Okay, I did want you to see it. So I would love for you guys to try this one. F of x equals -3 times the square root of x minus 2 plus 1. Think about the domain first, and then think about how you're going to make your XY chart. Okay? Please pause the video and give that a shot. Okay, so I hope you paused the video. Let's think of our domain. The smallest that the value underneath my radical sign can be, that I'm allowed to make that as 0. And by plugging in a 2 for x, that gets me that 0. So that's